and welcome to Talking Templars. Now, today we're going to find out why the English didn't torture and execute the Knights Templar back in the 14th century, while at the same time the French were torturing and executing the Knights Templar. But as we know, the French are a bit horrible, aren't they?
Oh, tush, Tony, no,
Sorry,
control your passions.
I couldn't control my feelings there. But anyway, no, actually, I love the French. I'm a great Francophile. Have a good out of that one. Okay, so moving on. Welcome to Talking Templars. You may be watching on TV or your smartphones. Join us in the conversation. Leave your comments, thoughts, questions, queries, whatever, in the comments section, and we will happily get back to you. So my name is Tony McMahon. I'm a TV historian, appear on all sorts of television documentaries, History Channel and so on. And Dr. Tibble, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Steve Tibble. I write about the Crusades, then the Templars and their rivals, the Hospitallers. And I just love everything about this part of the Middle Ages. So I guess I'm the irritating voice of reason to Tony's stories and fables.
Yes, I'm the voice of unreason. No, what I do is I know that a lot of you out there want to talk about the Templars and the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant, all that sort of thing.
The sort of things,
yeah, exactly. The sort of things that Dr. Tibble goes, oh God,
not again, Tony.
So that's the kind of dynamic that we've got going here. So we get the kind of the history and the mystery nicely covered. Good. Yeah, so buckle up. We're going to have a look at the Templars in England, and this might give you some ideas on places to visit as well, because there are some glorious places in England to visit that are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tony, it's absolutely true. And in fact, there's very few places in England where you're not close to something Templar. I mean, we're incredibly lucky. And the number of beautiful sites that are still around is outstanding. So, yeah, really looking forward to this episode.
I think the English Tourism Board they need a new motto: you're never far from a Templar.
You can take that either way. Yeah, exactly.
I'm copywriting that one. So, listen, if we're looking for evidence of Templars, I suppose the first thing that we do is look for anywhere that has the word temple in it. So Temple Meads, for example, in Bristol, but there are other Templar sites. So Steve, give us a quick guided tour of some key Templar sites in England.
Well, start in London. Headquarters of the Templars in England, and in fact the Templars in Britain, is London. It's the New Temple. It's a big precinct. It's still wonderful today. You can go around there. It's a legal centre now. And again, that's not a coincidence, because the Templars, as well as being great warriors in the East, were effectively a kind of professional services outfit in England and in Europe as a whole. And this was one of their big headquarters, really. The main headquarters were in Paris, but one of their big centres was also in London.
What you see basically, you have to take there's a little alleyway that leads off Fleet Street, which you can miss. You have to look for a little sign that says "This way to the Temple." You go down to the alleyway, past a load of barristers' offices, and you'll find this circular church, which is
amazing.
It's
gorgeous, isn't it? In fact, that little passageway, stroke road, is actually a 14th century. We know there were rights of way down that street, down even in the 14th century, which to me is one of the big clues as to why the Templars weren't the kind of secretive cult that some people try to paint them as. You know, basically there was a road running straight through their sort of secret precinct, leading down to the church, where pilgrims were invited to look at the relics and come for mass. You know, you couldn't be more open than that, really. But it doesn't play well into a kind of conspiratorial conceit.
Don't worry, I'm going to keep the legend alive here. But we'll be dealing with plenty of secrecy later on. But I mean, I read actually that there was a Carthusian friary or monastery nearby, and I read something very that amused me, that because the River Fleet, which is a little tributary of the River Thames, runs underneath Blackfriars Road, and I think the Templars used to power a watermill off the River Fleet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they got in trouble for dumping rubbish into the river, and it was the Carthusians, I believe, that complained to the authorities, saying those bloody Templars are dumping rubbish in the Fleet River again.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Actually got into Parliament. And it wasn't just that. they had their own reasons. They were trying to control, I think, trying to control the fleet with a small river in its own right, and they had multiple water mills up there, and they were being naughty boys, really. I think they were trying to take greater control of it for economic reasons.
For those of you lucky enough to live in the United Kingdom, Templar history is all around you. Dr. Steve Tibble looks at the knights who made Britain. The evidence is in the landscape, it's in town names, it's in the very fibre of our being as Britons. So find out all about the Knights Templar in Britain. Get your copy on Amazon, Waterstones and other outlets. Now, one place I found this year, I went up to Lincoln and we had a hire car and we went up to Lincoln. If you haven't been to the city of Lincoln, if you're visiting England as well, you've got to go because it has this vast cathedral, which was actually at one point, it was the tallest building in the world. I think it outstripped the Great Pyramid. It was the first building to outstrip the Great Pyramid as the tallest building in the world until its spire blew down in the 16th century. But huge cathedral where, in fact, the Templars, when they were arrested, the local Templars were taken to the chapter house there to be interrogated. But anyway, when you leave Lincoln, there's a place called Temple Brewer. And I knew there was a Templar tower there. What I didn't know, thank you Google Maps, was that I had to drive across a very muddy, icy field, damaging the rental car. I won't tell you who the rental firm was, but damaging the rental car.
Or the money that
the money that it cost to put that right. But in the process, but this tower there, and it was part of once a much bigger building, but it's just sitting there on its own. And this is where the last Templar Grand Master in England was arrested.
Wow.
Which is, and he was basically found with the Master of Auvergne, and they were dragged off to the Tower of London. This is when all the Templars were being arrested in 1307 across Europe, not just England. In fact, it started in France, but incredible history, and it's such an amazing.
It's one of those, Tony. It's one of those ones where a business trip actually works out well because the French Templar who was over from Auvergne happened to be in the right place at the right time. All his mates in France were being rounded up, tortured, burnt. It was horrendous. Whereas because he managed to get arrested in England, as we'll talk about later, he was interrogated, but there was no torture, and he was very bullish. He was a great old guy. He'd been a good fighter out in the East before he was transferred back to France, and he was so bullish in standing up for the Templars. And it really does go to show the difference between the guys who were tortured and the guys who weren't. You get the truth from the guys who aren't tortured much more than the ones who are in pain and will say anything to make the pain stop.
See, there you are, France. England really is your friend. Living proof again. And a lot of them were taken, of course, to the Tower of London. And Tower of London always sounds like a scary place, and it was a scary place for a lot of people. But I believe Pope Clement actually complained that he thought the Templars in England were being kept in lodgings that were a little too nice. He thought they should be kept in far grubbier conditions to force them to confess. But the English went up for that, really. They weren't going to treat their Templars like that. But of course, you can visit the Tower of London to see where they were held prisoner, not far from the temple and the new temple as well in Holborn. So you can do both in a day, basically. Yeah,
it is just walking distance. See, I mean, the other key thing that I think was annoying to the French authorities was the fact that it wasn't just the Tower of London. For a very long period of time, the Templars were basically told to go back to their estates and enjoy themselves and have a few horses and do basically they were just put under kind of house arrest of the loosest kind because the English authorities were never convinced that the Templars were guilty. There came a point when the Templar brand was so tarnished that it was hard to see a way back. But I don't think anyone in England was anywhere near as motivated to take them down in the same way that the French monarchy were.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read something about King Edward II of England even wrote to the King of Castile kind of privately saying, what the hell is the King of France on? What drugs is this guy on that he's rounding up the Templars? He didn't put it like that, but what is the King of, what's his deal? I mean, we can't see what the problem is with the Templars, but if we've got to go along with it because the Pope now says so, but of course the Pope was practically a prisoner of the King of France anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Edward pretty much went through his Rolodex to write to anybody who would read his letters saying that the Templars, there was no real evidence against them, and he was quite shocked. I mean, I think the key thing is that his father, Edward I, was not long dead, and that really allowed King Philip to step in and do what he'd been planning to do anyway, I suspect. And Edward II was in a much weaker position. He wasn't a great king anyway, but he hadn't even been crowned. It was, the French monarchy chose the perfect time when, the leader of the crusading movement in Europe at that time, who was Edward I, had just died, and his son was destabilized, and the Templars lost one of their biggest allies, which was the English crown.
And if we go back to so we're at the end of the Templar story there, but if we go back to the start, to the 1118, and the first Templar Grand Master, Hugh de Payne, he goes on this kind of, he's in the Holy Land, he decides to set up this thing called the Knights Templar, and he goes on a kind of, what do you call it, a tour of Europe. Road trip, that's what I'm looking for, a road trip around Europe saying, I've got this great idea, and everybody seems to love it, they all buy into it. Yeah. And he comes to England and Scotland, and he really gets shown the red carpet treatment. And the king in England, there's a separate king in Scotland. They say, well, where would you like to set up? How much land do you need, etc. And very quickly they got this network of what we call preceptories or commanderies, which are these little money-making machines, kind of agri-businesses. Worth kind of pausing for a moment, because we've got these network of preceptories where the majority of Templars live. They're not fighting the Holy Land. They're milking cows and shearing sheep, aren't they? Well,
possibly, Tony. But they probably have, people to do that for them. But yeah, they probably do occasionally get down and dirty. The other thing they do is they raise volunteers. It's a focal point for the Templar brand. And when Hugh came over in the sort of 1127, 1128, it was also a recruitment campaign, and he was raising an army to try and recover Damascus. Damascus used to be a Christian city until the Muslim invasions of the 7th century, and the Crusaders in the Holy Land, led by King Baldwin II, were really trying to organize a campaign to try and recover Damascus, and they pulled out all the stops, and the Templars were critical in getting that campaign underway. And I think because we know what the Templars became, big, powerful, larger than life, legendary figures, it's hard to remember just how totally insignificant they were at that point. When Hugh set off, I think he had 5 guys with him, which so there were 6 of them, and that was the majority of the Templar order. The majority of the guys left the Holy Land to come back and do this kind of road trip. It's almost like an investor relations thing, where they just visited all the big recruiting centers and made their pitch. They showed their deck about what the Templars stood for and what they could do, and it was an amazing transformation. They go from being literally like 10 or 12 guys wearing secondhand clothes into a papal order with lots of money, lots of influence, and lots of volunteers coming in. It was a transformative moment. So I think we can imagine that Hugh must have been a marvelously charismatic figure, and he was also selling the right product at the right time. This was something that the nobility of Europe wanted to hear, because they were pretty butch and muscular in the way that they rated themselves, and it was their way of combining piety with the kind of warrior skills that were so highly rated.
Because you've written a book about how the Templars made Britain. So what kind of mark do the Templars then make on England? They've come here, they've set up shop. Where are we going to find the Templars? Are they anywhere outside of London?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the answer is, the happy answer is everywhere, really. I used to live in Herefordshire, and one of my I could literally walk to the next village. It was called Upleaden and Osbury, where there was still a Templar tower. There was a Templar commandery there, had been given them by William Marshall. I could drive a short distance to Galway, where the Templars had a fabulous estate and a beautiful church and a semi-fortified tower, which is still there, and it's absolutely beautiful. And they had transformed that kind of sort of wooden, forest into classic high yield arable land. And I could equally walk the other way and go into Ledbury where the Templars had gone to market and sold their goods. So it is kind of all around us. And when I'm in London, it's sort of in the library, it's walking distance to the New Temple and lots of other places. I live near Canterbury now, and our next door village is called Temple Ewell, which is, surprise, surprise, the clue there is that it's a Templar commandery. And again, that's just walking distance. It was near Dover, so it was part of the effort to negotiate a peace between Henry and Thomas Becket, and the Templars were very instrumental in doing that. And we've got accounts of how they did the negotiating, where they're kind of moving ambassadors from one room to the other, and they're carrying messages from one room to the other. Very real life stuff.
It's the conflict between King Henry II and Thomas Becket.
Absolutely.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, which does, of course, end up with Thomas Becket being murdered in his cathedral. And you should go and visit the cathedral. You can see the exact spot where he was murdered. And I believe I'm right in saying, when his killers, didn't they have to go into the Holy Land? Is there just possibility that they actually had to go and join the Knights Templar?
Yeah, there are different versions of this, but you're absolutely right. It's sort of one or two of them were supposed to have become Templars, and that was part of their penance. It was a pretty dangerous job, so it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. I mean, you probably, you had a very high chance of dying when you were out there. And it looks like that was part of the penance for at least some of the four knights who were involved.
And then, there's a story that always amuses me, which is this town called Baldock, which is just, I think it's up in Hertfordshire. Right? Yeah. Baldock. Yeah. And I know that folks in Baldock claim that that Baldock is a kind of Baldadization of Baghdad, and what they say is that it was called Baghdad because the Templars wanted to emulate the fabulous wealth of the Abbasid Islamic Caliphate. Now, skeptics, now I'm going to anticipate, Steve, because I know I can hear he wants to get on.
I'm chuckling away here.
It could also mean bald oak, and it most probably does, but I like the Baghdad story.
Well, no, and actually there is a germ of truth to it, in as much as the Templars were big in that area. So they associated, guys who were fighting in the east, not Baghdad, incidentally, they never got near enough to that, but that they did dominate a lot of the local trade and agriculture in that area. And it was partly because the Templars were incredibly professional. So, warmongers in the east, peacemongers in the west, and around Baldock and, that part of the approaches to London, there was quite a good old road network, so part of the old Roman road network. And the Templars there were able to identify that it was a great opportunity to shift goods, make a good living out of sending goods, producing goods out in the country, taking them into London and so on. And created market towns and all of that. So they were small in number, but they did, they always punched above their weight. And you can see that whether they turned their hands to diplomacy or investment banking or agriculture or leading a charge, they were important guys and they were at the forefront.
Just a quick Templar ad break now to tell you about Downfall of the Templars by Tony McMahon. This book covers the thrilling events around the trials of the Knights Templar in 1307, leading up to the execution of the last Grand Master in 1314. Make sure to get your copy at Amazon, Waterstones and other outlets. And there's not, a lot of the physical evidence, the Templars, because their properties were handed over to the Knights Hospitaller or the local nobles, took them back effectively, and then just reused the stone for other things. And they never built on a huge scale because they were funneling all their wealth to the Holy Land. But interestingly, at a place called Witham in Essex, and I grew up on the border between Essex and London, there are a couple of barley barns from the Templar era which have remained fully intact. So that's Witham, Witham. There I'm trying to boost tourist income for Witham now. So do pop that. I believe they have a very nice tea shop there. So do pop along. But
and they're gorgeous as well. I've got some fabulous photos of them in my book called Templars, the Knights Who Made Britain, which is the Yale book about the Knights in Britain. And yeah, they're fabulous. I think there were 3 or 4 of those major barns at one point.
Now, Steve, I know it would be remiss if I didn't mention then, these caves that some people believe are Templar caves.
Yeah.
Cainton is one, and
Royston, I think.
Royston, of course, Royston, the famous one. So, Dr. Tibble, your view on those caves, and for those of you of a sensitive disposition, please turn the volume down now.
Dear viewer, please. Well, I do. I mean, I love the idea, and I love everything about that. I used to go through Royston a lot when I was hitchhiking back in the day up to Cambridge as an undergraduate, where I studied medieval history, and it's a lovely idea, and there are some lovely images there. I think it's pretty definitively been dated to slightly later in the 14th century. So I think it is wonderful. It is medieval, certainly parts of it, and it does have a lot of interest. So it's certainly worth going to. I don't think there's anything definitively Templar about it, and if the datings are correct, it couldn't have anything to do with them because the images are, I think, 40 years after they ceased to exist. But that's not to say it's not a wonderful thing. So I don't want to be totally
and obviously, if any of you, particularly if any of you live in Royston and you want to say "pa" to that, please do, because this is a discussion, debate, and of course there will be people who say, yes, it may come from decades after the official end of the Templars, but they carried on in secret.
Of
but
course
we'll be looking at all that as well.
And Elvis did.
Yeah, see, this is what I have to deal with, dear viewer. So look, that I think is a kind of a wrap, really, unless there's anywhere we think we missed out. I mean, there's so many great places that are associated with the Templars. I was in York Minster the other day, where I think some of the local Yorkshire Templars were brought to account for themselves, but we could go on and on, really, couldn't we?
Yeah, no, the Templars, that is the wonderful thing, is they're just a part of the fabric of life in Britain, really. If you know where to look, they're all around.
And I guess a question, I just to kind of round up, is how important was England to the Templars? I mean, I'd be curious to get your take on that, just to conclude.
Yeah, I think we're all partisan and Anglo-centric and Eurocentric and everything, but I suspect it depended. It changed over time. So when an English king was likely to be a big crusader, and that happened twice, really. Richard I and Edward I were both, leaders of the crusading movement in their day. And at that point, you find the kind of, the light, the eye of Sauron turns to them, and this is a focus for the Templars at that point. And they go gangbusters to help Richard Lionheart. The new master is appointed, who's one of Richard's men, is one of his admirals, Robert de Sablé. And similarly with Edward I, he only goes out on crusade when he's a prince, but because he is genuinely interested in the Holy Land and he's actually a very good general, again, the Templars are really focused on helping him as far as they can. So I think at certain times, England became the kind of an equal epicenter alongside Paris. For most of the rest of the time, I suspect it was an important province, but being English, you can probably overestimate it. The headquarters always were Paris. The majority of Templar masters came from what we now call France. So I think you can really over-egg all this nationalism.
Don't get too downhearted, because under Richard Lionheart, for example, what we call England now did actually rule most of France.
Exactly. And when you have Englishmen called Robert de Sablé, I mean, in what sense is he an Englishman, really?
So have that as a kind of comfort in the back of your mind that France was the size of a puddle in the at that time, but we have to park it there because we could, you can tell we're going to drift off in all kinds of areas. But if you'd like to know more about Templar sites in England, I will leave a link in the description below. Do remember to subscribe. We just like people to subscribe. It's just we want to be liked, and we're going to be back. We're very needy like that. In the next episode, on this continuing anti-French theme, and I do apologise to our French viewers for this.
So you should.
We should.
That's not part of the brief.
We're going to investigate King Philip IV of France, who really led the charge to destroy the Templars in 1307. So our question is going to be King Philip IV of France, barking mad or rational.
Well, it's not good, is it? I mean, either way, it's like evil or superstitious. I think are two different ways of looking at it.
I mean, I could be more bold in my language, but I'll leave that to the next episode. But until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And non nobis domine.
Join us again next week for more Talking Templars.